All right, everybody. So let's look at the Roman Empire. We've studied Caesar, we've studied all this other kind of stuff. Now let's take a look at the Roman Empire and see how it becomes less a republic and more something totally different. So we're started here with obviously Julius Caesar. And Caesar has a huge impact on everything as he expanded Rome and kind of named himself as dictator for life, but never actually emperor. That's the thing. But he did add all this area, Gaul, Spain, all this area he added to Rome, right? And so now when he dies, or is I should say, murdered, right? Who takes over for him? Well, the logical choice is the Senate. Not gonna be the Senate. His top general was a dude named Mark Antony. Not gonna be him either. How about a relative? Well, he didn't really have. I mean, his kids didn't really, have a lot of experience, that kind of stuff. So instead, it's going to be a dude named Octavian, who was actually his grand nephew. Caesar had taught him when he was young, taught about military and politics, and actually adopted him as his son, sent him to the best tutors in Albania, and named him as his heir and said, okay, when I die, which he wasn't planning on being that soon, by the way, you're going to be the next person in charge. And so basically, as his heir, Octavian shows up and is like, yo, I'm here to get my inheritance. That's Rome. People were like, I don't know about that one, okay? So instead, we're going to form a new triumvirate, okay? Another three-person oligarchy and make marriages work that way, okay? And so essentially this triumvirate, like we had last time with triumvirate, we kind of utilize this group, right? So Caesar dies, he doesn't have power, he doesn't have control, but he uses his link to Caesar, right? Caesar's being called a god now at this point. And so as part of that being called a god, he is going to make sure that he says, hey, I'm the son of a god now. He brings in Mark Antony, who was the best general for Caesar, and is like, hey, look, this is my buddy. He worked with Caesar. He worked with me now. He also brings in Lepidus, who was at the point richest man in this area, and also the deputy consul, and kind of says, hey, look, we have these guys ruling here, and we're rule together. And it's kind of the official, and that republic would now we no longer have a Senate making the laws. They're there, just not really, in true form. It's basically a three-person oligarchy, and they use marriages to make it official. Each one basically marries each other's daughters as a way to make sure that, they're all linked family-wise, that kind of stuff. And eventually, they start kicking each other out. So Lepidus is the first guy who's accused of treason while putting down a revolt. He's all his rights kicked out of the whole deal. And then all of a sudden, Octavian and Antony are sharing power, right? Antony rules the East. He lives in Egypt with Cleopatra, who was hooking up with Caesar. A little sketchy, right? And Octavian is ruling from Rome. Well, these two start fighting over who gets to be in control, and start fighting essentially a civil war, Antony versus Octavian, and who follows them. And so these guys are fighting. Octavian defeats Antony's navy, and Antony and Cleopatra end up committing suicide because they want to, they don't want to be caught by Octavian and be, killed in horrible ways. Antony stabs himself. Cleopatra decides to get bit purposely by a viper. Don't ask me why. All right. And you have their kid, whose name was Caesarion, the son of Caesar and Cleopatra, was then killed off by Octavian to make sure that there's no way anyone else could claim the throne. So all of a sudden, the only person left is, well, Octavian. He's going to call himself Augustus now instead. And he calls him Caesar Augustus. At 32 years of age, he's now the only ruler of Rome left. Gives a little bit of power to the Senate, so they think they have power, not really. Rules as a dictator, basically, and calls himself Augustus, which means the revered one. And he changed his name to Caesar Augustus, to that link with Caesar, and then the idea of Augustus being the revered person. And his title is going to be, he calls himself the Imperator, basically becomes what we call the Emperor, so what it comes down to. And so he has a big, huge army of 151,000 men he used to control everything, attacks people, takes over land, all that kind of stuff. He conquers all kinds of new land, new areas, and has his own little guard called the Praetorian Guard, which is 9,000 bodyguards to make sure nobody kills him off, right? Kind of what happened to, Caesar, right? And he conquers new lands, takes all this kind of stuff. And much like his adopted father before him, he adopts a son named Tiberius. It kind of becomes a tradition to, you're going to adopt somebody to become your next person in line. And so we eventually have this line of emperors who becomes emperor different ways. I go to this website right here, where we can see it. We're going to have a whole line of different emperors that exist. And I'll be showing off exactly kind of who the people are. And it's a whole big line of emperors going through all of history. And usually I was going to try and show you guys a line here, but my computer is not functioning right now. But that's okay. We'll look at it in class. Okay. There's a big, huge line of emperors going, through a big line. And the first line is all kind of related to Caesar. Well, one of the last one in this group is going to be a dude named Nero. So eventually we see people live for a long time. They gain all this extra land by 14 CE through Augustus. And these emperors kind of take over land and rule a bunch of areas. The last one, this first line of Augustus, is going to be a dude named Nero, who has a rockin' neckbeard in that statue right there. But he, essentially rules for a decade. He does some very sketchy stuff, right? Like he does things like kill his own mother because she had placed him on the throne and was kind of controlling him like a puppet. He killed his own family members, killed his own brother. He executed his first wife, so he married another woman, killed her too. While he was emperor, Rome burned down. Supposedly he sat and sang songs and stuff while he watched Rome burn down, which is kind of interesting. The upper class really hated him, right? Because he, was very controlling and all that kind of stuff. He did a lot of murders, those kind of deals. Whereas the regular people loved him because he gave them entertainment and money and public works and stadiums and free games and all that kind of stuff, and just gave up money to people like nobody's business. Common people were like, oh my God, this guy's awesome. Upper class people were like, this guy's horrible. We hate him. And eventually what happens is there's a huge grain shortage. People get hungry. He's declared enemy of the state and runs away and essentially has to commit suicide or else he's captured by the government. So we're seeing new emperors take charge now over time. We have this after Nero's kind of done, new line emperors come in, and we have a Pax Romana. So we had all these wars that took place from 250 BCE to 31 BC. We have the Punic Wars. We have the Civil Wars between everybody. After this time period, we have a time where there's really not a lot of wars taking place. And so Pax Romana literally means in Latin, the Roman peace. There's no civil wars because, well, you have a lot of emperors and now they're not fighting each other. You have no foreign wars because Rome basically controls everything. It's this time when Rome was really great and things were going really, really well. And we have more emperors, right? And so we have all this variety of emperors afterwards. So they're grouped around by their families and their deeds and stuff like that. You have the first one is called the Julio-Claudian line related to Augustus. You have the good emperors. You have a Flavian line, so on and so forth, okay? A couple quick stories, overview of them. We'll look at this more in class later on. There are 5 guys called the 5 good emperors that lived during this time. So you have Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, who are considered quote-unquote good emperors, right? Because they expanded the empire and had really kind of peace and all that kind of stuff. And really not a lot of bad things happened during this time. Most of the guys after them did a lot of really bad stuff, were ruthless and killers and murderers and all those kind of things, why they're kind of called the good emperors. But there's still a lot of problems with the empire though, right? It became so big, you don't have control of the land. And so over time, it got really hard to control this huge, huge chunk of land. And there was bad leadership with different leaders being assassinated and killed. And sometimes they go through 5 or 6 emperors in a year as they're being killed off so that somebody else could take over. You have invasions from enemies in Asia and Europe coming, a lot of stress on the empire. You have a huge inequality of rich and poor. And poor people getting angry. Not enough food, not enough soldiers, you have to hire mercenaries. All these things are happening in the empire that eventually make it fall apart over the next 300 years. There is one emperor who does a couple crazy things that we see how emperors kind of stand out. One of his name was Caracalla, whose also nickname was Marcus Aurelius Antonius, who, by the way, much like other emperors, murdered his brother to become emperor. It was a trend we saw, right? He, in order to get more Romans to like him, gave all free men in the entire empire full Roman citizenship, because before that, only people who were Roman were, well, in Rome. Eventually, he got murdered by a soldier who was mad he was not promoted. So you can kind of see this whole line of how people became emperors and got killed off. During this time, though, there's really cool things happening in the empire. We'll look at the great things the empire does as well, especially around trade and movement of stuff back and forth. There's metals and olive oil and marble and beef and glass and iron, all different things that are going over this whole huge network of roads throughout all of Europe and North Africa and the Middle East, all connecting to Rome. And even some of the Roman roads that were built back then are still in use today, are still together today, even though modern roads in Wisconsin don't last 5 minutes. But all these different goods are traded among different places in the Roman Empire, leading to their wealth and success. And we'll get more into this later on in class. Thank you for your time, everybody. I appreciate it. We'll see you later.